Yannick. So I'm glad, Heather and then Paseka for the first conference or for this conference. They have done a great job. And now we're going to have, if you have any questions, feel free to ask your question in the group chat, or, you can raise your hand here. And before I do so, because Heather spoke, it's not 1 more minute than Paseka. And I have a question in the group chat for Paseka. So Paseka, I will start with you, and then later on, we can take questions, from the audience. I think it is from Dr. Po, and he was asking if the BRICS country, or say, okay, Paseka, do you think in order for BRICS countries to form an effective counter against the IMF and the World Bank, they should first quit from the IMF and World Bank? That might force them to work harder in making BRICS more effective. Paseka.
Thank you very much, brother. Thank you very much for that. I think, as Pharumele, your questions do interlink. So what your question was, so what are you going to do to solve this very old problem? It goes back to
I think it was Milton who asked the question. I think it's for Dr. Paul.
Pardon?
I think it was Milton who asked the question to you.
Oh, no, I was saying that the two questions interlink. So okay. There are two questions that follow each other. Okay. So I just want to say that I think that you can answer them with one answer that, okay, yes, that's what you need to do. Okay. However, if you go back to what I was trying to say, I was saying that the new development bank is not necessarily, I'm not saying that it should remove itself from the IMF and the World Bank, but the problem is in itself, as an independent organization, it still welcomes countries that we know as imperialistic and have worked counter-African, liberation. So I'm saying that they should not be willing to accept donations from these countries or these external organizations, even the IMF itself and the World Banks, but should aim for independent, it should aim for functioning independently instead of having to function with the assistance of others. So the solution to the problem, the very old problem that you're saying, is that they should work independently. Independence is the only way forward for us to have a successful BRICS and a successful new development bank. So that's my suggestion for that. Thank you, Nyaka.
Okay, thank you so much. Heather, Dr. Safo from Lincoln University has a question for you. He wants to know if China is not an imperial power, is not an imperialistic.
Okay, so that is a question, and I will address it. But as I was discussing the loan structure in Africa and African development, I think it's important to reorient. I mean, I'm not African, so I'm not going to say that it's important to always reorient to Africa, but it's important to reorient to the perspective of where you're fighting from, whether it's Iraq, whether it's, the global South in general. From the perspective of Africa, purely, there is much more development investment from China. And it doesn't come with the same strings that the Western United States imperialistic investment comes. Now, does that mean that debt is the ultimate answer in liberation for the people of Africa? No, it's not. And I think it's important to recognize that that here in the case of China, its foreign policy is really not determined by any sort of revolutionary orientation or by feelings of anti-imperialistic solidarity. It's just that it's also still not a member of the small club of imperialistic powers that attempt to rule the world. That's really what the United States has a problem with. It is not considered to be part of the ruling class. And therefore, it takes a different policy because it needs to for its own development. China's policy is driven by nationalism rather than revolutionary internationalism right now. But there are some elements of revolutionary internationalism within the party, certainly, and that are voices there, certainly louder voices than there are in the United States in its foreign investment policy. So, you know, we don't see China's policy as being revolutionary per se, but from a Marxist point of view, it is entirely proper for China to deepen its economic relations and trade with capitalist countries, especially those in the former colonized areas and semi-colonized worlds. It would be better if China were to show greater solidarity with workers across Africa and participate more in the struggle against oppression. But I think it's also important to recognize where the US criticism is coming from, not from a concern for development in Africa. That's the point.
Okay. Thank you very much, Heather. Like short answers, short questions, that's great. Kakra, I think you raised your hand. Do you have a question, or Mary?
Hello.
Yeah, do you have a comment or a question?
I think I posted it in the chat room. So
Okay, I did not see it. So you may say it because I cannot read all of them.
Oh, okay. Very great contributions. I just wanted to say that I'm not confidently siding with the BRICS, because I the World Bank and the international financial institutions didn't start off as imperialistic. Somehow along the line, they decided to take advantage of the continent. It's the same thing the BRICS is preaching, considering that South Africa wasn't even part of the initial conception of the idea. So then it becomes another institution advancing African interests without Africa. So there's South Africa. That's just my thinking. They had to put South Africa for representation, and that is just one country representing an entire continent, as against 4 very large continents. Russia, India, China are not easy continents. I mean, so that is just one imperialistic state institution replacing another. So if we are saying we are moving away from imperialism of any sort, we might as well move away from any form of aid, from however it's represented by whomever. So then, of course, they'll come out to say it is a South-South cooperation. It is, look for other means to replace Western imperialism, but it's just going to turn out as imperialistic as Western imperialism is. And that is just my contribution. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mary. Of course, the speakers have to react. So I see Heather is where they want to go first, but I'll go with Paseka and then I come back to you, Heather.
Didn't want to go first.
You want to go first?
Thank you very much for
okay,
that.
Go Paseka.
I saw your question. I saw your question, and I did want to address it. Address it now. Kakra. Sorry. So I actually understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you. The problem is that as a continent, specifically using the continent of South Africa as a context, over the years we've been taking advantage of so much so that we find ourselves in a tricky space as to we don't know whether to trust anyone else or to just go about it ourselves. But we know because of some leaderships who do not believe in Pan-Africanism or African Union, who just push agendas of of nationalism, it's very difficult for us to find African unity. Going back to the point that you're making, that South Africa joined BRICS in 2010. Prior to that, I do not know to an extent the effects that BRICS or the relations that BRICS had to us as a continent. Because when we speak of the global South, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we do not only refer to Africa as a continent. We refer to the South of America. We refer to Asia, parts of Asia. We refer to, and et cetera, the Middle East. So it's important that we center ourselves as Africans, but we must also be aware that the movement in itself was not made to help us. And it's difficult for us to trust a country like China, because several years ago, when we were in 2018, when we were in Senegal, we had a conference with a few global leaders, and we asked them, so African leaders are meant to say, and we asked them, so what are you trying to do? Why do you allow China to continue doing this, to continue coming into countries and doing what the West did and colonized? And then they said, no, China is bringing funding. But when you go back and you look at how much land and resources China has taken over the last few years, you start to question this rhetoric that they are bringing help. If anything, you start seeing symptoms of what we saw historically, where people say that they offer aid, but what they get back from that aid that they claim to give is a lot more than what they claim to give back. So you can use examples such as USAID, you can use the UN, but you also have to look at what they take out, instead of looking at what the minimum that they give in. So I understand where you're coming from with your question. So and I totally understand, I totally agree with you, but also I'd like to say that we need to do something, because if we claim that we cannot we cannot work with anyone else, especially countries in the global West, in the global South, then how are we going to go forward? Because clearly African unionship is not working as it should, because of what I have just explained, where other leaders prefer nationalism, where they do not believe in African hegemony. So that's a very tricky, slippery slope, but I absolutely understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paseka. Heather?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from too. And I think that, the concern of being dominated by another power is always a concern that oppressed peoples have, especially after, Africa was carved up by the European powers, and now the United States is working with those same European powers essentially to militarily and economically suffocate the continent. So at the end of the day, the concern is real. And there are liberation movements developing, like we alluded to, among the youth, and also, the movement for Pan-Africanism that is growing across the continent. And so obviously investing more time and attention and solidarity and strengthening and support in the working class and the movements on the continent are the most critical aspect here. But where there is the need for development, and that people on the ground demand that development, demand access to finance, what we're seeing is simply that China is shifting the world dynamic away from one where the United States is simply able to just do whatever it wants and write all the rules after the overthrow of the Soviet Union, to one where at least the United States has to take into account the fact that China is offering something better. And for example, if you come into power in Africa, and not to say that you're a socialist or even a revolutionary, but if you come into power and you're looking for financing and you say, I want to redistribute wealth, I want to have equality, I want to build up infrastructure, you have options now that you wouldn't have had before.
Yeah, thank you so much. Before, is there any, if there are some people who want to react to the question asked by Mary or some other questions, I'm going to give you the opportunity. But one thing I wanted to add to the answers given by Paseka and Heather, yes, Heather said that now people have options. So when I talk about the BRICS, even though I'm not that excited because, Ivory Coast is not part of the BRICS, and then West African countries are not member of the BRICS, and then we are still suffering from the neo-colonial pressure or oppression of the French. But one thing that I always said, and then I saw that in the answer given by Heather, is that BRICS gives to Africa the power of choice. All right, so this is what we have to have in mind. The power of choice. Number two, in the BRICS, we have countries that have shown solidarity to the spirit of self-determination of Africa during colonial time. Before Nkrumah became the leader of Ghana, it started with India. India became independent. Pakistan, even though there was a war between India and then the Muslim and the Hindus, and then later on Indonesia, and then when we saw the defeat of the French at the Battle of Bien Dien Phu in 1954, and then later on there was the Bandung Conference, the non-alignment movement. So the BRICS brings back those memories of solidarity, that Afro-Asian solidarity, to quote Dr. King. So that's why we need to have those conversations. We're not saying that everything they're going to bring is rosy, no, but at least for the first time, Africans or other countries in the world, they have the power of choice. They can decide. And then even though, despite that power of choice, the Europeans are doing everything possible to undermine the spirit of sovereignty.